September 20th, 2023. Dawn. Tocuron Prison, Aragua State, Venezuela. 11,000 soldiers and police, backed by armored vehicles, surround a facility built in 1982 for 750 inmates. Inside, more than 7,000 people live under the rule of a gang, not the state. When the troops breach the walls, they don't find a prison. They find a city, a swimming pool, a zoo with monkeys and flamingos, a nightclub called Tokyo, a professional baseball stadium, a Bitcoin mining farm, restaurants, a horse race betting parlor, a casino, a children's playground, and beneath it all, a 5-kilometer tunnel network running to Lake Valencia, equipped with ventilation, lighting, concrete framing, and boats. The weapons cache alone would have made a small army jealous. 80 kilograms of C4 explosive, 400,000 rounds of ammunition, 40 anti-tank grenades, and 15 self-propelled rockets. That afternoon, Venezuela's interior minister stood before cameras and declared the complete dismantlement of Tren de Aragua. Total victory. But the 3 men who built this empire were already gone. They had escaped through tunnels days earlier after being tipped off by insiders. An estimated 400 to 500 inmates vanished with them. Only 88 would ever be recaptured. 4 prison officials were arrested for complicity. They did not just survive, they went global. This is how 3 inmates inside a crumbling Venezuelan prison built the fastest growing criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere, and how it became the most dangerous gang in America. To understand Tren de Aragua, you have to understand the system that created it. Venezuela's prisons did not just fail, they were handed over. In 2011, a 26-year-old gang leader inside Rodeo Prison held 4,000 Venezuelan security forces at bay for 27 days. The standoff humiliated the Chavez government. The president responded not by reforming the prisons, but by creating a Ministry of Penitentiary Services and handing it to a woman named Iris Varela, who ran it from 2011 to 2017. Under Varela, the state formalized a system that had existed informally for years, the Pran system. The word reportedly means hardened inmate, born killer. In practice, it meant the government surrendered control of its prisons to the most powerful inmates, in exchange for keeping order inside the walls. The state got quiet prisons. The Prans got kingdoms. Varela has since been sanctioned by 5 countries for ties to organized crime. Aragua State's governor during this period, Tarek El Aissami, reportedly facilitated the gang's growth as part of his own rise to the vice presidency. This was not a gang that beat the system. The system built them. The Aragua Penitentiary Center, known universally as Tocuron, became the headquarters. The gang's name, Tren de Aragua, translates to Train of Aragua. It traces to a labor union connected to an unfinished Odebrecht railway project linking central and western Venezuela. Some union members drifted into crime, were imprisoned, and organized inside Tocuron's walls. By 2014, the gang had consolidated total control under a leadership structure that inmates called Los Tres Papis, which means the 3 daddies. Hector Rustenford Guerrero Flores, known as Nino Guerrero, became the supreme leader. Born in 1983 in Maracay, Aragua, his criminal record stretches back to 2000. In 2005, he killed a police corporal during an attack on a police station. Arrested in 2010 for drugs and stolen goods, he entered Tocuron, escaped in 2012, was recaptured in 2013, and by 2014 had seized total control of the prison. In February 2018, he was sentenced to 17 years for homicide, drug trafficking, and weapons concealment, a sentence he served entirely on his own terms, entering and leaving the facility whenever he chose. Larry Amori Alvarez, known as Larry Changa, co-led the organization from prison for 8 years before escaping in 2015 to oversee Tren de Aragua's international expansion, eventually fleeing to Chile in 2018 and then Colombia under a false identity. The third founder, Johan Jose Romero, known as Johan Petrita, took control of illegal gold mining in Venezuela's Bolivar state, running an operation called the Sindicato de las Claritas, and providing military-grade weapons to the organization. Together, they created something no prison gang had ever done before: a multinational franchise. Inside Tocoron, Tren de Aragua, known as TDA, imposed a tax on every inmate called La Causa. It generated an estimated $3.5 million annually. The punishment for not paying was systematic and savage. A shot to the wrist for the first offense, the ankle for the second, death for the third. With that revenue and the government's willful blindness, they built the fortress that soldiers would later storm: the pool, the zoo, the nightclub, the casino, the horse race parlor, the pig and chicken farms, and the children's playground. Beneath the prison, a 5-kilometer tunnel network ran all the way to Lake Valencia, engineered with ventilation systems, electric lighting, concrete framing, and boats at the exit points. This was not improvised, this was infrastructure. They operated a charitable front called Fundación Somos el Barrio JK and surrounding neighborhoods, distributing food and settling disputes, enforcing social order in government-sanctioned peace zones where police operations were restricted. From the outside, it looked like community service. From the inside, it was territorial control. By the time the Venezuelan government decided Tocoron had become an embarrassment, Tren de Aragua had already outgrown it. And from this fortress, they built an empire unlike anything law enforcement had ever encountered. One not built on cocaine, not built on territory, built on people. Here's what makes Tren de Aragua different from every major criminal organization that came before it. The cartels in Mexico built empires on cocaine and methamphetamine. MS-13 expanded through Central American migration, but remained primarily a street gang focused on territory and violence. The Italian mafia grew through ethnic enclaves and Prohibition-era bootlegging. TDA went transnational by riding the largest displacement crisis in the Western Hemisphere. More than 8 million Venezuelans fleeing economic collapse under Nicolas Maduro. As one analyst noted, TDA is one of the few groups in Latin America that went transnational, not through the drug trade, but by following the exodus of millions of its own people. They did not need supply chains. They had a refugee crisis. The organization operates on a centralized strategic hierarchy with decentralized execution, described by researchers as flat in terms of execution. The three daddies sit at the top. Below them are Luceros de la Alta, senior managers, then Garritas, meaning lookouts, then country-specific cell leaders and foot soldiers. But here's the critical detail that makes TDA so difficult to fight. They also run a franchise model, selling the TDA brand to local criminal elements who operate semi-independently. This creates persistent confusion for law enforcement about which crimes are committed by core members and which are committed by unaffiliated criminals borrowing the name. Communication runs primarily through WhatsApp end-to-end encryption for cross-border coordination, Snapchat for managing escort services, and TikTok for recruitment and intimidation. Discipline is enforced through recorded killings circulated on social media, serving simultaneously as punishment and warning. Women who try to escape sex trafficking are murdered, and the footage is sent to other victims. The NYPD has reported TDA recruiting children as young as 8 years old. In Venezuela, the gang organizes beauty pageants in coastal towns, particularly Guiria in Sucre State, recruiting young women with promises of cash, phones, and modeling opportunities. That pipeline feeds directly into their most profitable and most brutal operation. That operation is called the Multadas system. TDA smuggles Venezuelan women and girls across borders, saddles them with debts of $2,000 to $14,000, and forces them into commercial sex work until the debt is repaid. Compliance is enforced through death threats against victims and their families, physical violence, kidnapping of anyone who tries to escape, and publicized killings designed to terrorize others into submission. Federal indictments describe stash houses, weapons enforced transport across state and national borders, and a highly organized system for managing the women through encrypted messaging apps. In Peru, a TDA faction known as Los Gallegos violently seized control of Lima's entire sex work economy, starting January 9, 2020, when 3 men walked into the Linz district and murdered the existing quota collector on the spot. From that day forward, all women in street sex work in Lima paid TDA or faced death. The gang was linked to at least 14 murders in Lima and operated in 13 Peruvian cities. At least 183 suspected TDA members were arrested there in 2023 alone. In Colombia, TDA extracts monthly payments from sex workers along Calle 38 in Bogota. In Trinidad and Tobago, they sold Venezuelan teenage girls to other criminal organizations for $300 to $500 per person. But sex trafficking is only one revenue stream in a diversified criminal portfolio. TDA runs ATM jackpotting operations, using a malware called Plautus to hack cash machines and force them to dispense their entire contents. An estimated $40 million or more has been stolen from U.S. financial institutions. By early 2026, 87 individuals had been charged across 3 Nebraska indictments in this scheme alone. They distribute cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, and their signature product, a pink powdery mixture called Tusi, that federal prosecutors call the gang's calling card. They run extortion rackets targeting migrants at border crossings, businesses in Colombian border towns paying $10 to $15 a week, Venezuelan rideshare and delivery workers in U.S. cities, and sex workers across multiple countries. They operate gota a gota, drop-by-drop loan sharking with predatory interest rates. Johan Petrusa controls illegal gold mining in Bolivar State with an estimated 5,000 workers, tapping into Venezuela's illicit gold economy valued at $4.4 billion in 2021. And they launder money through cryptocurrency, including that Bitcoin mining farm found inside Tocaron, structured remittances estimated at $15 million annually from Chile and Peru alone, front businesses, and an entertainment industry laundering network that led the U.S. Treasury to sanction a Venezuelan entertainer and 5 associates. In Brazil, TDA forged an alliance with the Primeiro Comando de Capital, one of the most powerful prison gangs in South America. Approximately 740 Venezuelan TDA members were baptized into PCC in Roraima state. TDA now supplies heavy weapons to PCC across at least 6 Brazilian states. The expansion followed a 3-step playbook identified by researchers: explore border crossings and migrant hubs, penetrate local criminal economies through spectacular violence, then consolidate dominance through extortion and trafficking. Colombia was the first target around 2018, with Tren de Aragua competing against the ELN and Gulf Clan for smuggling routes along the Venezuelan border. They put 6 Colombian police officers on their payroll. More than 240 members were detained there by 2024. Peru became a primary theater by 2020. Chile saw the emergence of the Pirates of Aragua and the most internationally notorious Tren de Aragua crime, the kidnapping and assassination of former Venezuelan Lieutenant Ronald Ojeda in February 2024. Men posing as Chilean police abducted Ojeda from his Santiago apartment in the middle of the night. His dismembered body was found weeks later in a concrete-encased suitcase. Chilean prosecutors publicly accused the Maduro regime, specifically Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, of ordering the hit through Tren de Aragua as an act of transnational political repression. In March 2025, a Chilean court sentenced 34 Los Gallegos members to a combined 560 years. The gang also expanded into Ecuador, Mexico, where it was detected in 9 to 10 states, Spain, where 13 members were arrested in November 2025, and 2 Tusi laboratories were dismantled, and Argentina, where 12 were arrested in May 2025. Tren de Aragua achieved in roughly 10 years what PCC took 30 years to build, and what MS-13 took 40 years to build. TDA members began entering the United States around 2021 and 2022, traveling within the broader flow of Venezuelan migration. The FBI confirmed the gang was operating on American soil in January 2024, reporting 41 suspected members arrested at the border in fiscal year 2023. By late 2024, DHS warned that TDA was active in 16 states and Washington, D.C. The Aurora, Colorado situation became the most politically charged TDA story in America. 3 apartment complexes owned by New York-based CBZ Management sat at the center. The verified facts: Aurora officials had documented severe code violations, rodent infestations, sewage backups, and no electricity since April 2021, years before any TDA presence. By November 2023, police identified 15 to 20 suspected members in the area. In June 2024, at least one TDA member participated in a $2.5 million jewelry store robbery. On June 27th, TDA informed the landlords they were now in charge. In August, a viral doorbell camera video showed 6 armed men entering a unit at the Edge at Lowry. Minutes later, 25-year-old Oswaldo Jose Dabuan Araujo was fatally shot. The rifle in that video was later confirmed as the murder weapon. In December, approximately 15 armed men kidnapped, bound, pistol-whipped, and tortured 2 Venezuelan residents. But the city's police chief stated plainly that gang members had not taken over the complex. Aurora identified roughly 10 to 12 TDA members in a city of 395,000. City officials labeled CBZ out-of-state slumlords who weaponized the gang narrative as cover for their own neglect. The violence was real. The takeover narrative was not. But both stories fed a political firestorm. In New York, a TDA offshoot called Los Diablos de la 42 terrorized Times Square. NYPD identified 37 members responsible for more than 240 arrests. In 2025, teenagers from the faction ambushed 2 NYPD officers in a Wolfpack-style attack near Times Square. Among those arrested was a 12-year-old with TDA ties who had previously been arrested at age 11 for Central Park cell phone robberies. In November 2025, a Homeland Security task force raided a TDA-linked nightclub in San Antonio, arresting more than 150 illegal aliens, 27 of them suspected TDA members. Sex trafficking operations connected to TDA were dismantled in Louisiana, Tennessee, and Oregon. In each case, the victims were Venezuelan women and girls. But 2 killings changed the political landscape more than all those operations combined. Laken Riley, 22, a nursing student, was murdered while jogging on the University of Georgia campus on February 22, 2024. Her killer, Jose Antonio Ibarra, a 26-year-old Venezuelan confirmed by DHS as a TDA member, had entered the U.S. illegally in 2022 through El Paso, been paroled at the border, arrested in New York for child endangerment, and released. He was convicted on all 10 counts and received life without parole. Her case directly produced the Laken Riley Act, the first bill President Trump signed in his second term, requiring detention of illegal aliens charged with certain crimes. Jocelyn Nungare, just 12 years old, was sexually assaulted and strangled in Houston on June 17, 2024. Her body was found in a creek. 2 Venezuelan nationals were charged with capital murder. One had been caught by Border Patrol on March 14th and released the same day. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. And here's the detail that haunts this entire story. The overwhelming majority of TDA's victims in the United States are not Americans. They are other Venezuelan migrants, the same desperate, displaced people the gang followed across the hemisphere. Could any crackdown actually stop an organization built to move with millions of refugees? Tell me in the comments. For years, TDA had operated in shadows that governments either could not or would not illuminate. But the murders of Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungare changed the political calculus overnight. The names became rallying cries. The faces appeared on cable news and congressional hearings and at the State of the Union address. And the full weight of the United States government came down. On July 11, 2024, the Biden administration's Treasury Department designated TDA as a significant transnational criminal organization, with $12 million in State Department rewards for its top 3 leaders. On January 20th, 2025, Day 1, Trump signed Executive Order 14,157, initiating the Foreign Terrorist Organization process and naming TDA alongside MS-13. On February 20th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio formally designated TDA as both a foreign terrorist organization and a specially designated global terrorist, the same legal framework applied to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Texas had already designated TDA as a terrorist organization in September 2024, elevating it to Tier 1 gang status with a dedicated strike team. Attorney General Pamela Bondi expanded Joint Task Force Vulcan, built in 2019 for MS-13, to target TDA, coordinating the FBI, DEA, HSI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, and the DOJ's National Security Division. In June 2025, Giovanni Mosquera Serrano became the first TDA member on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. A $5 million reward was offered. By December 2025, Nino Guerrero's bounty was raised to $5 million. The indictments came in waves. Operation Crazy Train, led by HS-11 in the Southern District of New York, became the centerpiece. In April 2025, 27 people were charged, 6 TDA members, and 21 from the splinter faction Anti-Tren, on RICO conspiracy, sex trafficking, 2C distribution, and murder. In September 2025, a superseding indictment added charges for a May 2024 Bronx double murder. In January 2026, 19 more people were charged in 29 federal counts, including murder for hire, kidnapping, and firearms offenses. The ATM jackpotting scheme produced 87 charges across Nebraska. On December 18, 2025, a nationwide crackdown unsealed indictments against more than 70 individuals across 5 districts. By January 2026, the DOJ reported 290-plus TDA members federally indicted since Trump took office. Larry Changa had been arrested on July 1, 2024, in Circassia, Colombia, described as the biggest blow TDA had ever faced. In February 2026, a senior figure known as Cucaracho, who allegedly coordinated cocaine shipments to the U.S. and Europe, was captured in Santa Marta in a U.S.-backed operation. Treasury sanctions expanded to Nino Guerrero's wife, a Los Gallegos commander, and an entertainment industry laundering network. The most constitutionally charged response came on March 14, 2025, when Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a wartime law last used during World War II against Japanese, German, and Italian nationals. Nobody had touched it in 80 years. The proclamation declared that TDA was perpetrating an invasion against U.S. territory and ordered all Venezuelan TDA members 14 or older apprehended and removed as alien enemies. Within 48 hours, more than 200 Venezuelans were deported to El Salvador's CECOT mega prison, the same facility built by President Bukele to hold that country's gang members. 137 were removed under the Alien Enemies Act specifically. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order, but the planes were already in the air. The Supreme Court blocked the deportation 7-2 in April 2025 on due process grounds. The Fifth Circuit blocked the act entirely in September, ruling there was no invasion meeting the historical threshold Congress intended when it passed the law during a quasi-war with France. 178 Venezuelan men were briefly held at Guantanamo Bay before being transferred to Honduras and then Venezuela. A declassified National Intelligence Council report directly contradicted a key administration claim, finding no evidence of widespread organized cooperation between the Maduro regime and TDA. The legal battles over the act remain unresolved. The deportations to CECOT have not stopped. The indictments keep coming. The arrests keep mounting. But the men who built this empire, 2 are still free. 1 is negotiating from a Colombian prison cell, and the machine they built keeps running. Nino Guerrero remains a fugitive, believed somewhere in Colombia or Venezuela's mining regions. $5 million is on his head. In December 2025, the Southern District of New York charged him with RICO conspiracy, terrorism support, cocaine importation, and machine gun possession. In January 2026, he was named alongside Nicolas Maduro himself as a co-defendant in a federal narco-terrorism case, the most aggressive legal assertion yet that TDA's leadership operates with the knowledge or support of the Venezuelan government. Larry Changa sits in a Colombian prison awaiting extradition to Chile. In October 2025, he published a letter asking President Petro for peace talks, offering to lead TDA's demobilization, a remarkable document from a man who spent a decade building an empire of exploitation. Johan Petrica operates from Venezuela's mining regions with apparent impunity, carrying a $4 million reward, protected by the same state that claims to have dismantled the gang. Mosquera Serrano remains on the FBI's 10 most wanted. Venezuela's refusal to share criminal databases with Interpol or to extradite its nationals creates a sanctuary that no American indictment can reach. And here's the ultimate irony. The Tocaron raid, the operation Venezuela conducted in September 2023 to prove it had destroyed TDA, paradoxically scattered the organization across the hemisphere, accelerating the very expansion it was meant to prevent. The gang now operates as a decentralized network of semi-autonomous cells, harder to monitor, harder to prosecute, and in some ways more resilient than the centralized prison gang it began as. Splinter factions like Anti-Tren in New York replicate the same criminal behaviors independently without orders from Venezuela. The identification problem persists. Law enforcement uses a 20-criteria point system scoring tattoos, social media, and clothing, but leading criminologists reject the methodology entirely. The foremost TDA journalist has stated plainly that Venezuelan gangs are not identified by tattoos. Analysts note that TDA's reputation has grown faster than its actual U.S. presence, and yet the violence is documented and real. The murders, the trafficking victims, the tens of millions in ATM theft, the 12-year-olds recruited in Times Square. Both things are true at once. TDA is a genuine and growing transnational threat that demands the full attention of federal law enforcement. And TDA has been used as a political symbol in ways that sometimes outstrip the evidence on the ground. What is not in dispute is who suffers most. The overwhelming majority of TDA's victims in every country it touches are other Venezuelan migrants. In October 2025, Larry Changa, one of the 3 men who turned a crumbling Venezuelan prison into a transnational empire, sat in a Colombian cell and wrote a letter asking for peace. He offered to demobilize the organization he had spent a decade building. Whether that offer was sincere or strategic, nobody could say. What was clear was that the organization he had helped create had long since outgrown any one man's control. TDA did not create the Venezuelan crisis. It fed on it. 8 million people fled a collapsed state, and a prison gang figured out how to monetize every mile of that journey, from the border crossings to the migrant shelters to the apartment complexes and the street corners in the Bronx. As long as Venezuela remains broken, the conditions that created Tren de Aragua remain intact. And somewhere between Bogota and the Bronx, between a beauty pageant in Guiria and a stash house in Houston, the next cell is already forming. The train left the station years ago. Nobody's found the brakes.